The snow outside painted the city in shades of silver and silence. From the towering glass windows of Knight Enterprises, the winter skyline shimmered like frozen dreams. Inside, the air was tense, sharp with the chill of formality and fear. A long conference table stretched across the room, lined with men in dark suits, their faces tight, unreadable. At the head of it sat Alexander Knight, the CEO, young, powerful, and known for being ruthlessly efficient. His voice carried calm authority, the kind that could end or build lives in a single sentence. Across from him stood Emma Dawson, her hands trembling as she clutched the folder that contained her fate. She had been called into this meeting without warning. Her lips were pale, her eyes wide with worry, and the faint dark circles beneath them hinted at sleepless nights spent finishing reports after her daughter had fallen asleep. "Ms. Dawson," Alexander began, his tone measured, businesslike. "You've been a valued employee, but with the current financial restructuring, we have to make difficult decisions. Your department," his words blurred in her ears. She swallowed hard, forcing her voice to stay calm. "Please, Mr. Knight, I understand cuts have to be made, but I can take a pay reduction, extra hours, anything. Just don't let me go. I really need this job." Alexander's jaw tightened, but he didn't respond right away. Around the table, a few executives exchanged uncomfortable glances. Her desperation wasn't something they were used to seeing in that pristine glass-walled world of numbers and profits. Emma took a shaky breath. "It's Christmas next week," she whispered. "And my daughter. She's been saving her coins for a tree. She keeps talking about how I promised this year would be special." Her voice cracked on the last word. "I don't want to break that promise." The room fell into heavy silence. Snowflakes drifted softly outside, landing like whispers against the glass. Alexander's gaze flickered for a moment, something unreadable flashing behind his cold, composed exterior. And then, before he could say another word, the door creaked open. Everyone turned. Standing there, small and out of place amid the sharp suits and sterile lighting, was a little girl in a pink winter dress, clutching a threadbare teddy bear to her chest. Her curls framed her round face, and her wide eyes shone with both innocence and fear. "Mommy?" she said softly, her voice echoing just enough to make every heart in the room falter. Emma froze. "Lily!" she gasped, her voice breaking in shock. "Sweetheart, you can't be here." But Lily didn't stop. She walked straight across the room, her tiny boots squeaking on the polished floor until she reached her mother's side. Then she looked up at Alexander, the man whose signature could change their lives, and whispered, her voice trembling with fragile courage, "Please don't fire Mommy." No one moved. The air seemed to vanish from the room. Even Alexander, the man whose decisions were always swift and absolute, felt the words settle deep into a place he thought had long turned to stone. Lily clutched her teddy bear tighter. "She works so hard," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "And she told me Santa would come this year if we had a tree." Her lower lip quivered as she blinked away tears. Emma knelt, tears streaking her face now. "Lily, it's okay, sweetheart," she whispered, her hands shaking as she tried to hold her daughter close. "Mommy will be fine. Go wait outside for me, okay?" But Lily shook her head stubbornly, her little fingers gripping the hem of Emma's sleeve. Alexander's throat tightened. He tried to look away, but the sight of the girl, small, innocent, begging for her mother's chance, was something no boardroom logic could rationalize. Around him, even the senior executives sat frozen, unsure if they were witnessing a firing or something much bigger. Outside, snow kept falling, slow and soft, as if the world itself had paused to listen to one little girl's plea. The meeting had dissolved into uneasy silence after that moment, but Alexander Knight couldn't shake the image of the little girl's eyes, wide, pleading, full of something that cut through the steel walls he'd built around his heart. Hours later, when the boardroom was empty and the city outside glowed under a sheet of snow, he still sat there, unmoving, his hand resting where that small child had stood. He could still hear her voice echoing faintly in his mind. "Please don't fire Mommy." The words were simple, but they carried weight far heavier than any contract, any deal he had ever made. The office was quiet now, save for the hum of the heater and the muffled sound of carolers singing far below on the street. The scent of strong coffee and paper lingered in the air. Alexander loosened his tie, leaning back in his chair, staring at the reflection of the city lights in the window. From up here, everything looked so small. The people, the lights, the movement. And yet tonight one small voice had managed to make everything inside him feel enormous. He turned his gaze to the open folder on his desk. Emma Dawson, Marketing Department, a steady employee. Reliable, hardworking, no complaints. Her recent drop in performance, the one that had put her on the termination list, suddenly seemed so painfully human. He remembered how she had spoken in the meeting, how her voice had wavered when she mentioned her daughter and the promise of a Christmas tree. He picked up her file again, staring at the stapled documents as if the ink itself could tell him the story it hid. The numbers and notes didn't show the nights she stayed awake, the tears she wiped quietly in the bathroom, the meals she probably skipped to make sure her little girl ate instead. A memory stirred. Alexander blinked hard as if resisting it, but it came anyway. He was 8 again, sitting at a small kitchen table with peeling paint, watching his mother struggle to balance bills. She had worked 2 jobs. He remembered the tired slump of her shoulders, the same kind of exhaustion he'd seen in Emma's eyes. One Christmas, she couldn't afford a tree either. She had made one out of paper, taped to the wall, decorated with colored buttons she'd found at her sewing job. And he had loved it. He hadn't realized back then how much it must have hurt her to do that. He rubbed a hand over his face, feeling something unfamiliar. Guilt, maybe, or empathy, or both tangled together. He wasn't supposed to feel this way. He'd built his career on making decisions that hurt people, all in the name of business. Numbers didn't cry. Reports didn't whisper. But people did. He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping softly against the floor. Through the glass walls, the city glimmered with Christmas lights, gold and blue and white, twinkling like they were mocking him for forgetting what this season was supposed to mean. On his desk, Emma's termination notice sat beside a red pen. He reached for it, staring at the signature line he'd been so ready to fill just hours ago, but his hand didn't move. He dropped the pen, sat down again and sighed, the weight of something long buried pressing on his chest. For the first time in years, Alexander Knight didn't feel like a CEO. He felt like a man who had forgotten what kindness looked like, until a little girl had walked into his world and reminded him with trembling lips and tear-filled eyes. He reached for his phone, hesitating before dialing his assistant. His voice was low, almost unsure. "Cancel Dawson's termination," he said finally, "and put a note in HR. I'll handle her case personally." He ended the call and leaned back in silence. Outside, the snow kept falling, soft and endless, the city's lights flickering through it like hope breaking through the cold. For the first time in a very long time, Alexander didn't feel entirely alone in his office. He could still hear that small voice, innocent and pure, echoing somewhere deep inside him, thawing something that had been frozen for far too long. Morning came quietly, the city wrapped in a soft white hush. Snowflakes drifted through the air like falling stars, settling on the crowded streets below. Inside the narrow apartment where Emma Dawson lived with her daughter, the alarm buzzed faintly, pulling her from uneasy sleep. She turned it off quickly, not wanting to wake Lily, who was curled up beside her, hugging her teddy bear the same way she had the night before, tight, as if afraid something might be taken away. Emma lay still for a moment, staring at the ceiling, feeling the heavy knot of dread return to her chest. Today was supposed to be her last day. The word termination kept repeating in her mind like a cruel echo. She had rehearsed what she would say when packing her things, how she'd tell Lily everything would be fine, even when she didn't believe it herself. She got out of bed quietly, her movements slow and careful. The apartment was small, 1 bedroom, 1 kitchen, and a flickering heater that groaned every time she turned it on. On the kitchen counter sat a mason jar half filled with coins, Lily's Christmas tree fund. Emma's throat tightened as she brushed her fingers against it. Her little girl had been so proud of every coin she dropped in, whispering wishes for lights, ornaments, and maybe even a star for the top. She got dressed in silence, tying her hair back and slipping on her worn coat. When she bent down to kiss Lily's forehead, the child stirred slightly, mumbling in her sleep. "Mommy, the boss didn't fire you, right?" Emma froze, her eyes stinging. She pressed her lips to Lily's soft curls and whispered, "Go back to sleep, sweetheart." Her voice cracked.
"Mommy will be home soon." The subway ride felt longer than usual, filled with the hum of strangers and the whisper of snow brushing against the train windows.
Emma clutched her gloves tightly in her lap, trying to steady her breathing. Every stop brought her closer to what she thought would be the end. When she finally stepped into the office, the usual hum of chatter and clicking keyboards seemed distant, almost surreal. People glanced at her with uncertain eyes, not unkind but pitying. She walked slowly to her desk, trying to ignore the lump in her throat, already preparing herself to gather her few belongings and leave quietly. But then she saw it. There on her desk sat a small white envelope, tied neatly with a red ribbon. A faint shimmer of gold lettering caught her eye, her name written in elegant handwriting, Emma Dawson. Her hands trembled as she picked it up, afraid to open it, afraid to hope. She slowly untied the ribbon, unfolded the note, and read the words written in dark ink. Keep believing in Christmas. Some things are worth saving. Beneath the note was an official document, her reinstatement letter. And not just that. There was also a line about a Christmas bonus, more than she could have imagined. Enough to pay her overdue rent. Enough to give Lily the Christmas she had been dreaming about. Emma's knees almost gave way. She gripped the edge of the desk, her breath trembling, tears spilling freely now, unstoppable. For a long moment she just stood there, letting the realization sink in. Someone had changed their mind. He had changed his mind. She turned slightly, her gaze falling toward the glass office at the end of the hallway, the CEO's office. The blinds were half open. Alexander Knight was inside, standing by the window, his hands in his pockets, looking out over the city. Their eyes met for a brief second. He didn't smile. He didn't nod. But there was something in his eyes, quiet, thoughtful, almost human, that said everything words couldn't. Emma pressed a hand to her chest, whispering a soft, tearful thank you she knew he couldn't hear. But maybe he didn't need to. Maybe he already knew. When she sat down at her desk, she wiped her tears and pulled open her drawer. Inside was a small paper snowflake Lily had made the night before, with the words Christmas Magic scrawled in childish handwriting. Emma smiled through her tears. Maybe, she thought, her daughter had been right all along. Maybe Christmas still had a little magic left in it, even in a place like this. Snow fell heavier that evening, soft and endless, painting the city in quiet beauty. The streets glowed under strings of lights, windows twinkling with warmth that seemed to defy the cold. In a small apartment tucked above a bakery, laughter floated faintly through thin walls, a kind of laughter that had been missing for too long. Emma stood by the little table in her living room, wrapping the last of Lily's presents. They were simple, a set of crayons, a second-hand storybook, a soft scarf, but each one was wrapped with care and quiet love. The heater buzzed gently, the smell of cinnamon drifting in from downstairs. It was the night before Christmas Eve, and for the first time in years the air felt different. Lighter, softer, filled with something she hadn't dared to name. Hope. She looked over at Lily, who sat cross-legged on the floor, humming as she drew with her crayons. On the coffee table sat a tiny potted pine tree, the best Emma could afford even with her unexpected bonus. But to Lily it was a miracle. She had decorated it herself with paper stars, shiny buttons, and a crooked golden bow. "Mommy, do you think Santa will find us this year?" Lily asked suddenly, her big eyes filled with curiosity. Emma smiled faintly, tucking a stray curl behind her daughter's ear. "I think," she said softly, "Santa never really forgets anyone. Sometimes he just takes a little longer to find the right address." Lily giggled, satisfied with that answer, and went back to coloring. But Emma's smile faded slightly as she turned to the window. The snow outside glowed under the streetlights, falling quietly over a world that seemed too big for her small life. She thought about Alexander Knight, about his unexpected kindness, about the note that had changed everything. She still couldn't quite believe it. Men like him didn't see people like her, yet somehow he had. A knock echoed at the door. Emma frowned, startled. It was late, nearly 10. She wiped her hands on her apron and opened the door only to freeze. Alexander stood there, tall and a little awkward, snow clinging to his gray coat. His hair was damp from the cold, and in his hands he held a small evergreen tree, fuller, brighter, adorned with silver ornaments and a string of tiny lights. "Mr. Knight?" she breathed, her voice barely a whisper. He offered a faint, uncertain smile. "I thought maybe. Your daughter might want a real Christmas tree after all." For a moment Emma couldn't speak. Her throat tightened, her eyes filling with tears before she could stop them. "You didn't have to. I know." He interrupted gently, his voice quieter now. But I wanted to. Before Emma could say anything else, a squeal came from behind her. "The boss man!" Lily exclaimed, running toward the door with her teddy bear in hand. "You came." Alexander chuckled softly, a sound almost foreign to him. "I suppose I did," he said, kneeling to meet her at eye level. "And this tree. It needs some expert decorators. Do you think you can help me with that?" Lily nodded eagerly, grabbing his hand without hesitation, pulling him inside. The warmth of the apartment enveloped him instantly. The smell of cinnamon, the faint sound of holiday music, the soft glow of fairy lights taped to the wall. It felt like home, something he hadn't felt in a very long time. Together they set up the tree in the corner of the room. Lily hung paper snowflakes and old ornaments with pride while Alexander steadied the base. Emma stood quietly, watching them, her heart swelling with a mixture of disbelief and gratitude. He looked so out of place in her small living room, yet somehow he fit perfectly. When they finished, Lily clapped her hands and turned off the lights. The room glowed softly with the shimmer of the tree. "It's perfect," she whispered, her voice full of wonder. Alexander looked at the tree, then at Emma, and for the first time in years his chest felt warm, not from success, not from achievement, but from something real. Something human. Emma met his gaze, her voice trembling slightly. "I don't know how to thank you." "You already did," he said softly. "You reminded me what this season is supposed to mean." For a long moment they stood there in silence, the air filled with the quiet hum of the lights and the soft breathing of a child who had already fallen asleep on the couch, her teddy bear tucked under her arm. Alexander smiled faintly, looking at Lily, then back at Emma. "She's brave," he said quietly. Emma nodded, her eyes glistening. "She's my whole world." Outside, snow continued to fall, blanketing the city in white, muffling every sound until only the heartbeat of that small room remained, gentle, human, and full of unspoken warmth. Morning light crept slowly through the frosted window, turning the edges of the curtains gold. The snow outside had stopped sometime during the night, leaving the world blanketed in quiet peace. Inside the little apartment, warmth lingered, not from the weak heater that rattled softly in the corner, but from the kind of comfort that only love, laughter, and belonging could bring. Emma woke to the faint sound of giggling. She opened her eyes and found Lily sitting near the Christmas tree, her tiny hands reaching for a small box wrapped in shiny red paper. Her hair was a tangle of curls, her cheeks flushed from excitement. The soft lights of the tree reflected in her eyes like stars. "Merry Christmas, Mommy," Lily whispered, smiling so wide it hurt to look at her without crying. Emma sat up slowly, her heart swelling as she looked around. The tree Alexander had brought sparkled beautifully, its silver ornaments catching the morning light. Beneath it were a few modest presents, not many, but far more than Lily had ever seen before. "Did Santa come?" Emma asked gently, her voice hushed with affection. Lily nodded eagerly. "He did, look, Mommy. There's even a present for you." She pointed toward a small box tucked beneath the tree, one that Emma hadn't placed there herself. Emma frowned slightly, curious, but before she could ask, a quiet knock came at the door. Her breath caught for a moment, a strange flutter of nerves rushing through her chest. She stood and walked to the door, her bare feet soft against the floor. When she opened it, Alexander stood there once again, not in a suit this time, but in a dark sweater and scarf, his hair tousled from the cold. In his hands he held a small tray with 2 cups of coffee and a paper bag that smelled faintly of cinnamon rolls. "Merry Christmas," he said softly. His voice was different now, warmer, gentler, as if something inside him had finally thawed. Emma smiled, surprised but grateful. "You didn't have to come all this way." He shrugged, a hint of playfulness in his tone. "I wanted to make sure you both had breakfast. And maybe," he hesitated, glancing past her at the soft glow of the tree, "to see how the tree turned out." Lily spotted him instantly and squealed. "You came back!" She ran up to him, hugging his leg before he could even respond. "You really are Santa, aren't you?" Alexander laughed quietly, kneeling down to her level. "I don't think Santa wears a tie to work," he said with a grin. "But maybe, just for today, I can pretend." He handed her a small present, a plush teddy bear with a red scarf around its neck. Lily gasped, hugging it tightly as if it were made of gold. "Thank you," she cried. He can be Teddy's brother. As she ran off to show her toys to the first Teddy, Alexander stood, his gaze meeting Emma's again. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence between them wasn't awkward this time. It was full of things words couldn't quite hold. Gratitude, respect, something deeper, softer, growing slowly between two people who had once lived in entirely different worlds. "You didn't have to do all this," Emma said again, her voice quiet, trembling with emotion. "You've already done so much." Alexander looked down, then back up at her, his expression unreadable but sincere. "You said something that stayed with me," he murmured. "You said your daughter believed this year would be special, I guess. I wanted to make sure she was right." Emma's eyes filled with tears, but this time they weren't from fear or exhaustion. "You did," she whispered. "You really did." They moved to the small table by the window, sipping coffee as Lily played on the floor, humming softly to her new bear. Outside, sunlight touched the snow, making the whole street sparkle. The world felt still, peaceful, as if time itself had paused to give them this one perfect morning. Alexander set his cup down, watching Lily twirl near the tree. "You know," he said quietly, "I've spent years avoiding Christmas. Too busy, too tired, too detached. But yesterday, when she looked up at me and asked me not to fire you, I think she did more than save your job. Emma? I think she reminded me what it means to have a heart." Emma's breath caught, a tear slipping down her cheek. She reached across the table, her hand brushing his. "Sometimes," she said softly, "it just takes one small voice to make us listen again." He smiled, a real, unguarded smile that reached his eyes. "She's got her mother's courage," he said. Emma's cheeks warmed, her heart aching in the best way possible. She didn't reply. She didn't need to. As the day went on, they shared breakfast, laughter, and quiet conversation. Alexander helped Lily build a fort out of couch cushions. He burned a batch of cookies and laughed harder than he had in years. The once cold CEO looked completely at ease, his sleeves rolled up, his laughter echoing in a home that wasn't his, but somehow felt like it should be. When evening came, and the golden light of sunset poured through the window, Lily fell asleep in his lap, her new Teddy clutched against her chest. Alexander looked down at her, his eyes soft. "She trusts so easily," he whispered. Emma nodded, sitting beside him. "That's what makes her special. She believes in people, even when the world gives her reasons not to." For a moment, neither spoke. The lights on the Christmas tree blinked gently, the air filled with the faint sound of distant carolers. Alexander turned slightly toward Emma, his voice almost a whisper. "You know, maybe I needed to believe again, too." She smiled through her tears, her voice trembling. "Then maybe," she said, "this Christmas changed both of us." He looked at her for a long moment, and then softly he reached over and placed his hand over hers, not in command, not in pity, but in quiet understanding. And for the first time in a very long time, Alexander Knight didn't feel like a CEO at all. He felt human. Outside, the snow began to fall again, and light, gentle, full of promise. And inside that tiny apartment, 3 hearts found something they hadn't even known they were searching for. Not just kindness, not just hope, but a new beginning.